Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. Little Brian Stelter, little Bri Stelter. He's created this media title or media persona for himself as if he's Mr. Reliable Sources. He's a true neutral journalist. It's the most unbelievable scam that you could possibly imagine. But for a while, his grift was working. He was getting away with it, at least before the days of Donald Trump. But Brian Stelter has become probably one of the least respected characters in the mainstream media. We've made many videos about little Bri, and in every single one we mention how he constantly goes to university campuses to give lectures or do talks about what real journalism is, lecture students about journalistic integrity, coming from a man who literally has none. And while in the past Brian Stelter could get away with this stuff, more and more as Brian Stelter does public events or takes questions from live audiences, or during a live feed on C-SPAN taking call-ins, well, little Bri Stelter cannot get away with it anymore, as he is now routinely or regularly humiliated by people in the crowd or live callers during every single event. And of course it happened once again. Little Bri Stelter gets owned by a first-year college student. Let me show you guys what's going on here. But of course, before we get into any of it, please make sure to leave a like, a comment, subscribe, share the video as much as possible. We are still shadow banned by the YouTube algorithm, hidden from non-subscribed viewers. And with that out of the way, let's roll the tape. Alright folks, so we don't need too much context, just take a look at what happened.
Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Christopher Phillips. I'm a first year at the college. My question's for Mr. Stelter. You've all spoken extensively about Fox News being a purveyor of disinformation, but CNN is right up there with them. They pushed the Russian collusion hoax. They pushed the Jussie Smollett hoax. They smeared Justice Kavanaugh as a rapist, and they also smeared Nick Sandmann as a white supremacist. And yes, they dismissed the Hunter Biden laptop affair as pure Russian disinformation. With mainstream corporate journalists becoming little more than apologists and cheerleaders for the regime, is it time to finally declare that the canon of journalistic ethics is dead or no longer operative? All the mistakes of the mainstream media, and CNN in particular, seem to magically all go in one direction. Are we expected to believe that this is all just some sort of random coincidence, or is there something else behind it?
It's too bad. It's time for lunch.
You have 30 seconds.
No, I mean, there's a clock that says 30 seconds. But I think my honest answer to you, and I'll come over and talk in more detail after this, is that I think you're describing a different channel than the one that I watch. But I understand that that is a popular right-wing narrative about CNN. I think it's important when we talk about shared reality and democracy, all these networks, all these news outlets have to defend democracy. And when they screw up, admit it. But when Benjamin Hall, the Fox correspondent, was wounded in Ukraine, the news crews at CNN and the New York Times stopped what they were doing, and they tried to help. They tried to help him get out of the country. They tried to find the dead crew members. That's what news outlets do. That's how they actually do work together, to your question about sharing those kinds of connections and trust. We don't talk about it enough, though. We don't share that reality about how that happens. And with regards to the regime, I think you mean the President Biden. The last time I spoke with a Biden aide, we yelled at each other. So that's the reality of the news business that people don't see, that people don't hear. They imagine that it's a situation that it simply is not. But I think your question, it speaks to the failure of journalism to show our work and show the reality of how our profession operates. We have a lot of work to do, I think.
Little Bri is the most disingenuous person in the media. I mean, the job of a journalist is to deal in facts. For instance, the job of a journalist when dealing with a politician is supposed to be asking hard questions and challenging politicians when they give you political non-answers. Little Bri Stelter proves that he is not a journalist but rather a politician, a political actor, because he answers questions with total deflection and acts exactly like a Washington swamp creature. The college student laid out the facts why CNN is considered fake news and certainly not the most trusted name in news. And little Bri Stelter didn't address the question at all, none of the context. He did conveniently say that it was just Republican rhetoric, and then went on to invoke the ghost of a Fox News reporter who lost his life in Ukraine, as if that somehow justifies the constant lies and constant partisan propaganda that comes out of Brian Stelter and CNN. Well, of course it doesn't. And it shows you just how right that college student was, because had Brian Stelter addressed the actual facts of what this college student laid out, he would look like a complete fool. What's he gonna do? Argue that the network was right and that his coverage of Nicholas Sandmann was correct? Argue that Hunter Biden's laptop was in fact a Russian smear campaign? Russian disinformation, as Brian Stelter literally said on his network. It's got the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. What's he gonna do? Double down on Russiagate? And the Russia lies surrounding Donald Trump? Of course he can't. And so he immediately changes the subject, targets something as sensitive as a Fox News reporter losing their life while covering the war in Ukraine, and says, see, we're not partisan. We tried to help Fox News when one of their own was in trouble in Ukraine. I mean, what a ridiculous argument, especially coming from Brian Stelter. I mean, what's the point that he's trying to make? That CNN is a neutral outlet because they, have a good relationship with Fox News? How does that make any sense? Not to mention, Brian Stelter's entire identity at CNN, his entire job, is to literally rag on Fox News all day, essentially call them extremists and call for the canceling of Tucker Carlson. What a disingenuous actor, and what a nonsensical argument. It wasn't an argument because little Brian Stelter didn't have a response to the actual facts. Brian Stelter doesn't deal in facts. Brian Stelter deals in narratives and propaganda. The man who's supposed to be giving a lecture or doing the talk is the one being lectured and being completely exposed by first-year college students. Just goes to show that these partisan actors in the mainstream media are the bottom of the barrel when it comes to the journalistic world. Brian Stelter isn't a reliable source. He isn't an authoritative voice. In the world of journalism, he's a laughingstock in the world of journalism. And that's why this continues to happen. I mean, these events are starting to pile up. There's a whole timeline of Brian Stelter getting absolutely owned.
Brian Stelter's show keeps slipping and slipping and slipping in the ratings.
He's the worst.
Brian Stelter talking to the press secretary saying, what are we doing wrong? What are we doing wrong? Like, hey, you're supposed to be a journalist.
And they wonder why they get no views.
Mr. Stelter is the biggest minister of misinformation I have ever heard, and I'm a news junkie.
You know, CNN is just something it's a joke. It's a joke. Right. This guy tells more lies, and Fox gives more news than CNN does in their...
What lie? What lie did I tell?
2 years. It's nothing but lies.
You know, you're full of sanctimony. You become part of one of the parts of the problem of the media. You know, you are one of the reasons people can't stand the media. Most people don't want to turn to Brian Stelter to tell us what's real.
And it's just another one to add to the list. And I mean, it's the oldest trope in the book. The man who claims to have the most credibility, the man who's loudest about touting his own success and his own virtue, is usually the least credible and the least virtuous. Brian Stelter's show is literally called Reliable Sources. So reliable that CNN's Brian Stelter refused to walk back his false claim that Hunter Biden's laptop emails were, quote, Russian disinformation. A man who's so reliable and so credible that when he pushes a straight-up false narrative, he refuses to walk it back months later, when it has been unequivocally proven to be false. Brian Stelter talks about journalistic integrity while being wrapped up in this massive scandal involving Chris Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo, and his former boss, Jeff Zucker, where he was tangled in the middle of all of it, yet he continued to report on it and report it like he was shocked and dismayed. Oh my God, nobody knew that this was happening, when inside sources say that that was complete BS, and insiders in CNN were even calling for his firing. And speaking of Brian Stelter's firing, there are now rumblings that CNN may be giving little Bri Stelter the boot. Take a look at this little snippet from Jesse Waters' primetime show on Fox News.
Last week, we told you that following the poor launch of the network's streaming service, CNN Plus, employees were bracing for layoffs. And now it looks like Stelter and his show might be the first ones on the chopping block, with sources saying at a recent Discovery Board meeting, the largest shareholder, John Malone, referred to CNN's Brian Stelter as a cancer and a Zucker henchman that has a failing show. What are you waiting for? Don't threaten us with a good time, CNN.
And with the failure, with the disaster that was the CNN Plus launch, and with once again Brian Stelter being one of the headliners, it's another business failure surrounding Mr. Unreliable Sources. And as the ownership group behind CNN is potentially going to switch here, well, honestly, it makes sense. I mean, the best business decision that you could possibly make for the network is getting rid of unpopular, disingenuous characters like little Bri Stelter. Top New York journalist Brian Stelter, who gets absolutely owned on the facts by first-year college students. it's pretty much a no-brainer. And the only reason Brian Stelter is still around is because he's the perfect media puppet, a total lack of integrity, and a total willingness to do whatever the Democrat Party needs and whatever his bosses at CNN want, and that is the only reason his career is still going. And what an absolute joke that guy is giving lectures and doing talks on journalistic integrity. There is none to be found within his entire being. There's a lot in that big belly of his, but one thing you won't find is any integrity whatsoever. That's what I got for you guys though. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, share the video as much as possible. We are still shadow banned by the YouTube algorithm, hidden from non-subscribed viewers. I'm gonna get back to work. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.